Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Ruksa Bhattacharya. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Medical Sciences and Technology, IIT Madras. With a strong foundation in biotechnology, her expertise lies in the areas of medical imaging, image processing, and computational and quantitative techniques. She was a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Radiology and Biomedical Imaging, University of California, San Francisco. Her work includes musculoskeletal imaging, quantitative susceptibility weighted imaging in the grading of intracranial mass lesions, and assessment of acute ischemic stroke penumbra, among others. We are honored to have you here, ma'am. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Advait, right? Yes, thank you. I remember some of you when I visited your schools for the interviews, and very happy to see you all here. Hope you can all hear me all right, and please feel free to stop me whenever you have any questions. Anything. It can be as silly as it goes, but please feel free to stop. Okay? So I'll give you a little brief of who I was. So I did my BTech in Electronics and Instrumentation long back, 15 years back at this point. Then I did my biomedical masters, and I worked for Philips for a long time. So Philips, you might have heard, this is a healthcare industry who makes medical devices. So I worked there as a graduate engineer trainee for a period, and then applications engineer. And then I did my PhD, my postdoc. So my PhD was in IIT Delhi, and then, as he mentioned, I did my postdoc and then moved towards IIT Madras as a faculty. I have not yet completed a whole year. I only joined about 8 months back, and happy to have you all here. So let's actually move to the introduction slide. So first question, and don't even look at the slide. Any of you have ever been scanned, as in for a CT scan, for a X-ray scan, MRI, any of it? How many? Raise of hands. Okay, so many. Okay, how many of you have ever been scanned for a MRI scan? Okay, small number, but you know how the experience is like. So this is one of the, so when we talk about medical imaging, as I mentioned, there are many different ways or modalities, right? So you must have heard CT, X-ray, ultrasound, but one of the techniques that I'll be sharing with you today is called MRI. So can anyone guess what it is, what the full form is? Magnetic resonance imaging. And I distinctly remember there were a lot of questions on magnetism during the interviews, and you all know magnetism, right? You all are familiar with the laws of electromagnetism. You have studied that in class. So I'll take you through what happens in an MRI scanner. So it basically looks something like this in the block A, and we have a gantry, or like a train coupe, but just with additional layer of plastic there. So you are supposed to lie down on the table, and then on that there is the whole thing happening. So first component, there is a magnet. Can anyone guess what is the field strength of, or what is the strength of Earth magnetic field? Any guesses? Okay, so MRI is almost 3,000 times more powerful than Earth magnetic field. This can be varying over multiple types of field strength, but the most common MRI scan or scanner you will see is called 1.5 Tesla or 3 Tesla. And look up the relationship between Tesla and Gauss. That is the magnetic field strength, right? So this is much, much more powerful. So when you lie inside that MRI scanner, what happens is within your body there is more than 70 to 80% of what? Water. Water has protons, right? We all know that. These protons are excellent dipoles, meaning they behave as very, very small, tiny magnets. So whenever you are walking around, they are usually just randomly oriented. But the moment you stand inside a MRI scanner, because the magnet is so powerful inside, most of your bodily protons will align according to the magnetic field of the MRI scanner. Question so far? No. Okay, so what happens is, now you have, let's see if I can have a board. So now this is going to be your B0, that is the main magnetic field. And the moment you walk in, all of your protons, there are tiny, many of them. So all of them will point towards this. And together you can think this to be a net magnetization vector. Okay. So now we want to measure the signal of this vector. Not the main magnet, we know that that is there, but we want signal from our bodily protons, right? So we designed something called RF pulses. Anybody has heard about RF? Do you guys still hear radio? Yes? Do you know the frequency, the wavelength? The number is not important. What is important is you have a spectrum of waves, right? In that spectrum, there's RF is a distinct certain amount of kind of a wave. It's called R is for radio and F is for frequency, right? So radio frequency pulses. Once the person is inside the MRI scanner and all the bodily hydrogen atoms and protons are aligned to the main magnetic field, what we do is we have something called these RF coils right here. They can be transmit coils and receive coils. Basically, they can transmit signal and receive signal. So let's start with transmit. What are they transmitting? They're transmitting RF pulses or specially designed RF waves in a way that they want to flip this M vector orthogonally. So they want to flip it to 90 degrees right here. It's a very genius design. The way they do it, they put an RF pulse, they apply an RF pulse on this net magnetization in a way that they can flip it to 90 degree. Okay, what happens then? They flip it, so next what? Once they flip it, they just withdraw that RF pulse. Imagine you are giving an RF pulse which is a certain amount of additional energy, right, to the bodily protons. Once you withdraw that energy, what is going to happen? Louder? That vector will come back to the origin, right? So once that vector comes back to the origin, the additional energy that it absorbed in form of the RF is going to be released, right? And that is the signal that you capture in the transmit-receive part of the coil. So the transmit part of the coil is just flipping it. The receive part of the coil is, receiving the signal that is being emitted from this. So, okay, why is this signal important at all? The signal is important because when we are envisioning that all of these small protons are aligned to B0, all of them are aligned to B0 the same way. So they work together. But once you remove the RF energy and they try to go back to the B0, they behave very differently. So if all of these are hydrogen atoms, all of these are protons, but depending on which body part or which tissue they are kind of associated with. So for example, if there is a proton along with your fat tissue, that is going to take much different time to go back to the main magnetization direction than the proton that is attached to, let's say, your muscle tissue, right? So all of these bodily tissues based on what time they relax. This process is also called relaxation. So based on what time they relax, we can actually take the signal, we can localize the signal. There is additional mechanism, for example, gradients. We are not going into that. The gradients is just to tell you where exactly is this signal coming from, because your body is huge, right? You get bunch of signals, you don't know where exactly in your body is it coming from. So you need to know that XYZ localization, that is what the gradients do. But based on from what body part the signal is coming from, the signal will be very different, and you can plot it back to finally a MRI image. That's how you basically get MRI images. And yeah, that was the premise of it, and you start with something like this with a person lying here, but finally you end up with something like this where you have a brain scan of a certain human being, and this person was being scanned like that. Okay, questions? No? Yes.
How does the radio RF pulses turn the emitter?
So in the RF pulse, very good question. In the RF pulse, you can program the angle you want to turn it to. So you put the certain amount of RF pulse. RF pulses look something like, you know, it has a duration, it has an amplitude and all of that. And you can program it with something called flip angle. As the name suggests, flip angle. Flip to what angle? So you can put it as, you know, 90 degree, you can put it as 180 degree, you can put it as, there are conventional ways, and you can code that inside your pulse. And that is how you, I mean, right now, all of these hardware is, as you can imagine, coded using a software. So you can go to the software, code the pulse to behave as you want it. You can make it longer if you wanted, to keep it flipped for longer and then withdraw. But can anybody imagine why we are giving it for small time and then withdrawing, not keeping it longer? It will be harmful. It's not, RF is not ionizing radiation, right? It's not as harmful as X-ray or CT scans, but it contains some heat energy. So if you keep putting it on longer, then you can have something called SAR value that goes very high. So this is called specific absorption ratio, and tells how much of the energy of the RF energy is actually getting deposited in your body. So if you keep the pulses on for very long time, you can see some RF burn, which is not a real proper burn, but it starts feeling like if you touch a very hot vessel, you see that, you know, reddish burnish sensation. That's what starts happening. And in all of these codings and programs, we have guardrails in place. So if you try to code your pulse, let's say just for fun, I am trying to code my pulse very long and trying to keep it long. In a clinical scanner, it won't let you do that. It will just, the system will just stop you because we have some guardrails there. Yes?
So will increasing the angle provide us more information better?
Yeah, again, very good question. 90 degrees selected because this is roughly on an average, most tissues respond to this kind of an angle, and this is observed over time. But let's say you have a tumor tissue or you have a certain kind of tissue which needs more time to relax, right? In that case, you will just put it back to 180 degree and let it relax for the whole amount of time, right? And so you can, again, you can also pulse, you can also code at what point. So let's say you withdraw the RF, it's relaxing. You can decide at what point do you capture the signal. That is completely up to you. Based on what point do you capture the signal, you might omit some things. For example, you are not interested in looking at water signal from certain tissues in the brain at all. So for example, in this case, you can see this is a blackish image. So a lot of black in the image means no signal or less signal, right? Complete dark is no signal, grayish black is less signal. So you can tell that these, you have not really allowed these tissues full time to relax. So it's just not there. Yeah. Could be both. Could be both. Depends on, this is called saturation or suppression, selective suppression. You want to suppress some amount of tissue because you are not just interested in seeing them. And if a clinical scan comes to you, that might not be the best approach. So the first scan you will probably take everything and see what is there. But once you localize these dots or something, for example, in this case you can see there's a tiny dot right here which is on what we are focused. If you had the whole image white, you won't be able to see this tiny dot. So we decide to suppress certain amount of tissues. Okay? Okay. Now with this technique is in premise, let's move on and let's see some of the applications. Okay? So for example, this is, I'll show you some existing techniques and some conventional advanced techniques as well. So for example, CT scan we are all familiar with. Can anybody guess when does one go for CT scans and when does one go for MRI? Internal bleeding, yes. Anything else? Okay. CT is very good for emergency, for example, internal bleeding or trauma. For example, an accident has happened and something might have happened to the skull. Basically, CT is very, very good for hard tissues, that is bones, skeletal tissues. What MRI is good at is soft tissues. Yes, so very good. So bone, what is the water content? Less, almost none. So that is why bone doesn't react to MRI at all. Sometimes this is helpful because you just get a whole black area and you can say, okay, this is bone because it's black. But otherwise, when you have to look at soft tissues, for example, these are cancer, brain cancers or tumors or lesions. In this case, you want to understand many aspects of the soft tissue. So you can't really get done with CT scan. You need to go here. Now on the left side, you see a few weighted scans. These are all conventional MRI scans that are currently available at any clinical scanner. So if you walk into Apollos and all of these, they are very high-end hospitals. But if you even walk into a tier 3 city in a small MRI scan, they will still probably have all the first 5 kinds. So they're nothing but, these weightings are nothing but again, selective suppression of various different tissues. You can see that these are all the same image, basically coming from the same section of the brain, but they all look very different. And we try to find very different things in each of these things. For example, here you can see areas which are dark, they get very bright here. What are these? Can anyone guess? So, fluid. So, depending on that, you can choose how you want your fluid to look like, how you want your gray matter to look like. Our brain is comprised of gray matter, white matter, many different nerves. So, you can decide what area is it that you want to focus. And if you go for an MRI scanner, they will invariably do these 5 kinds of scan just to look at if there is any anomaly. And if they find that, okay, I have done 5 scans and nothing is going wrong at all, so they'll probably release you. Now, if there is an anomaly, meaning there is a certain kind of disease, they will have to go for advanced techniques, right? And what do we mean by advanced technique? Techniques which are not really available in all scanners, technique which needs hard coding, and a lot of research goes into that. And not just the acquisition part of it, but what do you do after acquisition? You have to work with the images to understand the biomarker that you are looking for, right? So all of that, so the whole right hand side that you see here, my right, your left, the whole left hand side that you see here is going to be, or So, for example, in this case, we have something called SWI, which is susceptibility weighted imaging. So, in this case, you will see we are prioritizing nothing else but small veins that are coming up, right? So, we want to understand the susceptibility properties. Vein contain hemoglobin, blood basically hemoglobin, and then within that it changes the property of magnetization. So are you all familiar with diamagnetic, paramagnetic, ferromagnetic, right? So what is iron? Ferromagnetic. So in our veins there are very very small amounts of hemoglobin, and what does hemoglobin consist of? Iron to a certain extent, right? So they will respond. This is a particular kind of sequence that is designed in a way that it can capture the veins very nicely. So again, this is another type of image where we have established that there is a tumor, but we want to know more. So what happens in brain, tumor grows very quickly in a very large amount of size, right? So ideal case, the doctor will just resect the whole tumor, and that is okay if it's if it's in your hand or another part of your body. But in brain we are particularly concerned, because if you remove a whole chunk of area, that depending on what age the patient is, that is going to affect their life. They can lose motor function, they can lose some of their speech, they can lose some of their cognitive functions. So the doctors always try to understand that what is the actual malignant area that we need to remove at the minimum, so that we don't leave any cancerous cell behind. How do we know that? So this is a whole tumor, or in this is a whole tumor. How do we actually know that what part of it is cancer? Do you know, anyone knows what is the gold standard? How do we know if a tissue is cancerous? Biopsy. Biopsy is the gold standard. Either biopsy or there's something after biopsy, there's something called histopathology. But what is the problem with that technique is that you take out a sample of the tissue, you put it in your microscope and staining and testing, and that shows you cancerous cell. But what if it's a big area? You can't keep taking samples from the whole of the brain. That's not experimentally possible. So on your imaging side, you need something that can tell you whether this part is cancerous, yes or no, right? And how do we guess that? We can't, and let's keep AI aside for a minute. Definitely AI can do all of that with proper training, but let's keep AI aside. With a conventional algorithm or a conventional technique like MRI, they are not pre-trained to pinpoint this is cancer, this is not. They can just show you. So what can they show you? You want to see the metabolism, which is something that can be seen also by PET imaging, you might have heard. But in MRI, what additionally you can see is what are the vessel supplies. So which are the vessel within the tumor that are taking up more food supplies. Why does that happen? So let's say there is a big cancerous tumor inside a patient's brain, and some of the regions have more. You can do a specific kind of MRI sequence which measures blood flow and blood volume, and see there are certain region within that tumor, for example these regions, which are bright, meaning they are taking up much more blood supply and blood volume. Why does that happen? Yes. So they are doing something called angiogenesis. They need to multiply faster. They're aggressive cells, so they're growing faster, and to grow faster they need food, and that food comes from blood supplies. So even sometimes you will see there is high flow. Sometimes you will also see that there are multiple new small vessels being generated, which is basically meaning that the existing vessel are not good enough to supply the tumor tissue. So there are more vessels being generated, which is called as angiogenesis. Okay, so where are engineers coming into this? These are all things the doctors can do. So the engineers are coming here with the techniques. So the whole instrumentation side is one of the biggest industries that there is for medical devices. So I'm envisioning, let's say some of you will grow up to be a MRI engineer someday, hardware engineer per se, and you will work with all of these pulse sequences, designs. You can do the instrumentation part of that, which is basically a electrical training. Or you can then major into something called imaging or image processing, which is something I majored into in later part as well. I hope it works. Okay, so I'll skip this probably. Yes. So let's come to this. What we were doing with this, or this is one of my project, and I wanted to give you a brief overview of how that looks like. What we were doing into it was that we took 4 eco-magnitude data. Just says something complex. You can think like 4 different kind of MRI images. Okay, we took that. Then we designed some kind of an algorithm, and again keep AI aside, it's just conventional algorithm, okay, where we do something called co-registration. Any of you familiar with registration or know how it can be used? Any guesses? Wild guesses are okay. Okay, so for example, I take 4 MRI slice of the brain, okay, 4 different MRI slices of the brain, and this looks something like this. But between these 2 slices, the patient might have moved a little bit, okay, and I'm not saying gross motion within the scanner like that. I'm just saying rough movement, very very thin movement that is not even visible by naked eye. But the image needs to know that, because if you move a little bit and then you treat both of those images as time point 1 and time point 2, you would just completely mislabel, right? Because for example, you take the picture of this board and I move the board by slight 0.1 millimeter. It does not have any implication if you subtract one image from the other in case of the board. But in case of your brain images, if you do that subtraction and you do some kind of labeling and you identify tissues as cancerous without accounting for the fact that they might have moved, then the whole thing goes wrong, right? Your algorithm goes wrong. So you need to do something called registration. And registration is probably the first project or lesson you will ever do if you get into a field like medical imaging, which is you have 2 images and you are trying to match them mathematically so that they are perfectly aligned. There are many different ways of capturing motion. For example, translational motion, you know all of that, right? Translational motion you all know. So for example, you move in a translational pattern. Similarly, images can be translationally moving. So you can register accounting for translational motion. But if the patient is moving slightly in rotating manner, then you also need to account for rotational motion. So there are many different kind of motion that you can account for in the registration process. So that was the first part of the project where we did the registration of all of those images. Next, let's come to something called mapping. So mapping is if you have multiple kinds of MRI images and you want to put them into an equation, try to find the curve of it. So you all have done curve fitting little bit? Yes. So if I give you multiple data points, so I give you multiple x values and y values and I ask you to plot that curve, fit that curve. If it's a straight line, if it's a straightforward curve, very easy to fit, we all know the equation. If it's a parabola, again we know the equation. But in biological samples, most time You don't know the pattern of the curve. You can't predominantly say that it's going to be a straight line, it's going to be a parabola, or whatever. So you're just given a random number of points in the x and y axis, and you have to do something called curve fitting. And you have to fit the curve in a way that it accounts for most of the data, because you can't discard real-time biological data. Okay, questions? Yes. Yes, good question. So x-axis is your number of observations. So number of the first MRI scan, the second MRI scan, the third MRI scan, the fourth MRI scan. And y-axis is going to be your signal received on that scan. Or let's say, how do you see a particular area in your brain is plotted in the y-axis. What is the signal coming from? And then you do it over multiple times, but you have to fit the curve to know what the area looks like. Okay. So let's go to the images. So what we were doing is, so these are conventional MRI images, right? So this is row 1, this is row 2, row 3. You see on all of these cases, you see 3 big tumors, right? These are 3 different patients. So you see the tumor in all of these cases. Can you point out? So for example, this is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one, right? So can anyone guess the grade of the tumor? For example, we say, is it given in the image? I don't know, probably not. Okay, so we say grade 2 is a less aggressive tumor, grade 4 is a very aggressive tumor, and grade 3 is intermediate. So if I give you the first 3 kind of images, there is no, or even the first, all of these images, there is no way to kind of predict or know from conventional scans that what is the grade going to be. Okay, you can take biopsy samples. You can take biopsy samples, let's say, from any of these area, but it can give you grade 2 for all of these, depending on where you are taking the sample from. So you want some kind of a technique or some kind of a method that can tell you non-invasively. What does that mean, non-invasive? Yes. So you don't want to pick and prick the patient with anything. You just want to non-invasively know what is going on. So we designed an algorithm which can look into, again, as I spoke about, the vasculature supply. So we were able to, at this level, we were able to design a pulse sequence that captures the vascular feed that goes to the tumor. We were able to quantify what is the IVV. IVV is intratumoral vascular volume, right? We were able to quantify that. And if I give you these images now, I think you can pretty much guess, right? If you segment the tumor region and within that you look at the vasculature volume supply, you can pretty much guess that this last row has much more quantitative supplies of vascular volume compared to the first row. But if you go back to the conventional image, again look at this. This tumor looks very big compared to this. This is really small and more of fluid, right? But this is the most aggressive tumor compared to this. So this is kind of a snapshot of what we do on day-to-day basis. We design pulses which can capture images that way. We design then processing methods which can give you quantifiable biomarkers. And at the last end, you have to also validate these biomarkers that you can quantify, or you can do this. Let's say I give you, a summer project where you get some images and you get to do this. But that is not the end of the world. You will need to validate this against a ground truth. You need to validate whether the predictions you are making based on these markers are true or not at all. Okay, questions, anyone? Yes.
Previously, you talked about registration.
Yes.
So you said that the algorithm would take account of the patient's movements.
Yes.
But how exactly will that be?
Very good question. So there are mathematical, models that can do that. Basically, what you do is you have a prior, right? So in this image, for example, you know how the structure can look like, right? So for example, you have forget everything that is inside the brain line, but you can look at just the outer boundary, right? So you can do a segmentation of the outer boundary in the first image and in all of those images. So how that will look like is, in your image number 1, you have a box, and let's say this is your outer boundary. In image number 2, the patient has probably moved, so this is your outer boundary now. Can you see the difference between these two images? So you start with aligning the outer boundaries first, okay? So then what you will have to do is you can subtract these two images and try to minimize the difference. So it's an iterative process, yes.
But the MRIs were studying the tumor only, right? So unless the tumor moves, why do we have to do the registry?
Unless the tumor moves. But then if you're looking at quantitative parameters, if the patient has moved a little bit, so if you have one time point scan, the first time point and second time point, and you subtract them, because this color or this volume that you see is not coming off just out of the scanner. You have to calculate these after a series of mathematical processing. The first step of the processing is to be able to align the images. If you don't align, now let's imagine the tumor has not moved. The tumor is the same, but the patient has moved. So you can see at 1, the image is like this, at 2, the image is like this. So you can clearly see that the patient has slightly moved. Now if you subtract these two images, what will you get? You will have some non-zero values here, and you will probably have some negative values here. Whatever is overlapped is subtracted out, but what you have up and down is something is remaining, right? So now, if you have multiple images like this, imagine having 50 different slices or 30 different slices. If you keep doing this subtraction without registering them, it's as same as, let's say you take multiple papers. If you don't stack them neatly, then all of your algorithms that are based on the group behavior are going to fall out. Because at this map, let's say you're looking at so for when you talk about images, images are two-dimensional matrix. All of you are familiar with matrix, right? So let's imagine a 3 cross 3 matrix. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, okay? In the next image, the patient has slightly moved up. So your 1, 2, 3 is now out of the matrix. So you start with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So if you think both of these are the same kind of images, then you're just going all wrong, because then you are subtracting the wrong row from the wrong row, right? As opposed to, let's imagine they are perfectly aligned, okay? So the first image is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In the second image, the tumor is aggressively taking up the volume, right? So 1, 2, 3 is normal region, there's no change. 4 and 5 has become 15. 6, 7 and 8 has become, let's say, 30, 9. Now if you subtract, you can actually pick which are the regions that are taking up the most amount of blood supply. And so you need to actually stack them very well, and this stacking is mathematically registering. And how you do registering is, it is an iterative process. You keep aligning. So when you develop your registration algorithm, you never develop it on a patient. You always develop it on a normal, where you expect the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 at all the images. So now if your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, 8, 9 has moved slightly. So you have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this has gone up or down. You can actually try to minimize that difference because you know that this is not a tumor case, there is no uptake or there is no blood supply volume. So you try to match those two matrices, multiple iterations. As long as they're not matched, you go on. At some point the matching will converge and your algorithm will stop, right? But once you have developed that algorithm, then you can deploy that on a clinical case and you can actually pick up which are the regions that are taking up the most amount. Questions? Yes.
Why can't there be a sensor inside the scanner which can detect the minute movements of the patient and coordinate it with the
There are. So there are sensors inside the scanner which can talk about gross motion. For example, if the patient sneezes or if the patient like says something or like sometimes they're even asleep or they're not in their senses, so they coughs within the scanner. If that happens, the sensor can detect. But if there is no gross motion, for example, if your head is not moving in a noticeable way, then the sensor is not going to pick it. But every small millimeter, even your breathing, when you're lying down and you are breathing, your head doesn't move. But inside your brain, there are protons which are moving at that point. So you have to account for that in MRI. Yes. There are both ways. So earlier there used to be complete discarding, but right now there are motion correction algorithms as well. So for example, you can train models to completely correct for that motion as well. So that is also possible. Because sometimes discarding we can't really afford because then you have to scan fully again. If the patient has the time and the money, then sure. But in a country like ours, we are resource constrained. So we can't keep on, yes.
So if there are like 3 slices,
Yes.
the second slice the patient has to move.
Yes.
So the registration, why can it go back to the slice it has missed and scan it?
No, the registration can do that. It can do that, but it has to know it. It has to know that it has to go back and do again. But this process you are doing at a later point of time. So the patient maybe in 5 months, they did 5 scans, right? So you are given all the scan data, 5 scans data. You can't really at that point have control for the patient to go back to the scanner and do it again. Yes, yes. There's no in scanning registration. Scanning is just scanning, you get a set of images. Yes. 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 Who will answer that question? The answer you guys all of you know. Its magnetic content is strong. So because this is a very strong magnetic field, and you can experiment this or don't quote me on this, please don't experiment on this, but you can technically. If you have a clip or a clatcher that has a very small screw in your hair or something like that, and if you walk into the MRI scanner, you will see slight pulling. You can see that it's being pulled by the main magnet. And people have done grave mistakes. So sometimes people walk in with oxygen cylinders. I'll come. People walk in with oxygen cylinders, which is heavy ferromagnetic material. People walk in with, security guards walk in with things. So there are all different kind of accidents that happen with MRI. But that is the main reason. Yes. So with braces, I think these days braces, and not just braces, implants. A lot of people have knee implants or spine implants. In those cases, you will be given a certificate that tells that this is, the material composition of the material that you have. For example, braces or implant, what is the material composition? If it's titanium, it won't get affected. If it's something else, it would. So if you are going for MRI scan, you are supposed to know what material it is, or you can call up the doctor and ask what material is inside the braces, and they can check. Right. And what is the question again? Sorry. You can't take it off, but if it's a titanium implant, it is not ferromagnetic, you can scan. If it's not titanium, if it's, for example, somebody who has got an implant 50 years back, at that point titanium implants were not even available, so you can't really scan those people. You can't really do anything. You can refer to CT, that won't tell you the soft tissue contrast. So you go into a observe. Yes.
Ma'am, you told that, so in registration, you told that if the image changes, you have to like match the images,
Right.
But like, why should you match the images? If you have different copies of the same like tumor, won't it, since registration is iterative, so if you have different copies, won't it give an overview of the entire tumor rather than matching the images? If you have multiple copies of the same tumor, won't it be better for studying a tumor?
I'm not sure I understood you rightly. So, when we say registration, what we have is 5 different images. Here, the crucial factor is they are from 5 different time points. So, in that time point, the tumor is going to, grow and change. So, the tumor can't stay same. What will stay same is the outside, like how big your brain is. That is going to stay same. So, if inside things are going to change, outside the boundary is going to kind of stay same. So, you take the boundary and try to match the boundary. If you just try to match the tumor, then it might have grown, right? So, you miss areas in that case. Was that?
Time points minimally different or do they vary?
Depend on what kind of aggressive tumor it is. If it's quite aggressive tumor, then the time point is minimally different, sometimes on the scale of weeks. And if the time point is if the tumor is a lower grade, a less risky.
Even in a week difference, you still have to register and
Yeah.
map.
Yeah. Not just weeks different. Even let's say the patient went into the scanner, you scanned them, they want a bathroom break, okay? They came out, they went to the washroom, they came back. Even then you have to register, because you can't really, you have to make sure, because these are small voxel level quantifications that you are making, and this is clinically very, very important. So you can't risk it. So registration is something you have to.
Any minimal position change,
You will have to registration. So that is medical imaging. Is registration is more of a guardrail that I was talking about. Yeah? Okay. Any more questions? Yes.
Specifically in something like permanent tattoos, there are heavy metals present in the inks.
Yes.
So when someone has that which is embedded within just the layer of their skin, how to do an MRI scan for those?
Usually they are asked, if it's a small superficial tattoo, then it's okay. Otherwise, people with deep metallic tattoos are asked not to do a scan, because it will be burnt. Like, you will experience burn in those areas. In fact, a very commonly used product that has metal content is mascara. So a lot of times people will be asked to remove their eye makeup before you can do a brain MRI scan, because it can get burnt. Yeah, it's trivial, but for imaging scientists it is important to know, because either it will burn, or if it's ferromagnetic, what it creates is, it creates a blackening kind of artifact. So when you take the image, artifact meaning error in the image. So when you take the final image, you will see that this whole area is black, and if there is a tumor, you can't even see it, and all that for that damn stupid thing. So it has to be very, very well calculated, right? Okay. Yes. Questions?
So you say that metals will disrupt the scan, right? Will it do any harm to the machine?
If it's a big enough thing that can be pulled off, for example, an oxygen cylinder, for example, a big, VIP person is being scanned, and their security guard walks into with a Sten gun, a rifle, whatever. Those things get pulled off, and then fatal accidents happen. They have happened in India. They can damage the machine, but more than damaging the machine, they can be damageful to the surrounding. But on a smaller scale, if you have tattoos and smaller materials, they can cause burn in the patient, does not harm the, yes.
Also with the oxygen cylinders, what would a person using that for breathing, how would they take the scan?
So in that case, they have special MR compatible oxygen supplying machine. So before you move the patient to the MRI room, you will have to transfer them to that MR compatible. There are MR compatible critical care devices that can be. Yes.
The CT scan is mainly for identifying structures that have less volume. So why can't we use an MRI scan itself, but whichever region has low signals, you can identify that as well.
That is being done these days mostly. So for what his question was is that the CT scan is talking about hard bones. So if in the MRI scanner, if I see that as a black, then I should assume that's, so I can just replace CT scanners. That a lot of people are doing that, and a lot of people are also training models to be able to predict CT images from MRI, because that is a trivial task apparently. But even then, CT scanners are not going anywhere. Can you guess why? Who said cheaper? Yes, that's the reason. MRI scanners cost 15 to 20 crores. CT scanners can come in 1 crore and less. And they are computationally and device-wise much less expensive. So MRI scanners need liquid helium. The machine has to be cool, so there needs supplies of liquid helium, and that is extremely costly, that challenging to take liters of liquid helium to a remote location like Ladakh or Nepal. But CT scanners very easily, yeah.
So, ma'am, like, you're saying that, like, people are trained to predict, like, the CT scan images from MRI.
Not people, models.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Can we do the inverse?
People have tried the inverse as well, but the inverse is slightly more problematic or slightly less diagnostically accurate, because CT scans, if I can go back to that image, I will, but CT scans are less informative. So basically you are training the model to like hallucinate some information. MRI scanners are much more informative than CT scan. So if you are basically training a downscale problem, right? In MRI you already have the data, you are training the model to predict CT scan, which is kind of a easier solution. X-rays are cheaper, CT scanner then, and then MR. So yeah, X-rays are the most, but then X-ray don't give you the 3D views that CT scan. Yes. Exactly. So sometimes depending on, very good question, sometimes depending on, within one scan itself we'll take multiple measurements. Depending on the time, usually a patient can hold still for 20 to 30 minutes. So as many measurements as you can get within that is ideal, but I mean, yeah, there is a compromise. As you said, there's no right amount, as much data as you can get, the fitting gets better. Yeah, that can happen, totally, that can happen. So as much of data you have, you keep fitting the curve. That's how it is. Yes. Right.
So does that depend also on the position of the RF coil as well, where we want to?
Yes, yes. It depends on the position of RF coil, which is why when you walk into a MRI scanner, you are not scanning everything. You will, the 2% or 3% who did their MRI scan might have noticed, if you go for a brain scan, they will put a helmet like a, something like a coil, it's called a coil, a helmet-like structure on your brain. If you are going for an abdomen scan, they will put something on your abdomen. That is RF coil that is telling where does the signal needs to come from. So localization. Okay, let's stop here. I will have my website information and contact information, email, everything shared with Keshav. So if you have any more question, feel free to let me know. Okay? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving that wonderful and informative lecture on one of the most common machines that we might use in our future life. The talk about conventional and everyday use of MRI machines, as well as registration and mapping, was truly informative. Thank you, ma'am.